Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington Perry with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are hosting the first in a two-part series on what A Course in Miracles can bring to politics. Our conversation today will center around the presidential candidacy of Marianne Williamson, and we will continue next week with a conversation around course teachings that lend themselves to an elevated political vision for our world. In the interest of full disclosure, we should say here at the beginning that Marianne Williamson is a friend of ours. Robert and I have known Marianne for many years now, and we have both contributed to her campaigns. But independent of that, the fact that a teacher of A Course in Miracles is running for president of the United States is worth discussing on a podcast called Exploring A Course in Miracles. And so that's really what we're doing here. If you are a student of the course, I'm sure you know that if you were to line up 10 strangers on the street, maybe one person will have heard of A Course in Miracles. And so this really does feel like a moment that we should be embracing as one that has the potential to bring the course into the world in a meaningful way. So let's get into it. Robert, the fact that arguably the most well-known course teacher in the world is running for president of the United States should be a very big deal to us as course students. Here we have a presidential candidate whose views are surely informed by the material and the teaching in the course. And so that means that we have someone through whom the course could make a big difference in the world. And so regardless of how anyone feels about Marianne as a candidate, just this moment in history feels very important to A Course in Miracles, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it's not exactly every day that a student and teacher of A Course in Miracles, this not very well-known path, runs for the most powerful office in the world.
Mm-hmm. Right. So as we've seen so far, though, and we saw this in Marianne's last run for president, her candidacy isn't taken as seriously as it should be or deserves to be. I think that moment with Joe Biden's press secretary is an unfortunate example where the secretary was asked for thoughts on Marianne's run for president, and her response was mocking and pretty flippant.
Yeah, I mean, it was really saddening, to be honest. I felt just awful watching it. Basically, she said that she's completely ignoring Marianne's candidacy, and then she started making fun, saying, I don't have a
Crystal
crystal
ball,
ball or a magic 8 ball.
or I can't
Um,
feel her
I
aura.
can't feel her aura. And she's just laughing. And it was incredibly disrespectful.
It was, and it wasn't even just the press secretary, it was the room. The room
Hmm.
kind of erupted into laughter, and then the press secretary said, "You guys are making me laugh." And I was just about to say that you and I thought that Marianne's response to that was a bit of a master class in grace. I mean, she said, basically, "I'm an American citizen. I have a constitutional right to run for office. And as a civil society, we shouldn't be lowering the conversation to this level." And she brought up the fact that Joe Biden said himself that
Hmm.
if anyone is disrespectful to a member of the staff, or I don't know how broad he made that, but they would be fired on the spot. And she's mentioned she wasn't calling for the firing of the press secretary, which I think is the right move. But
Hmm.
to not fire the press secretary is the right move. I want to be clear on that. I don't think the press secretary should be fired either. I think we all make careless remarks from time to time. But at the same time, what Marianne was saying about the level of conversation that we should be having in something as serious as a presidential race matters. And so you and I just really liked her response.
Yeah, I would encourage people to look up her response because she was like far and away the grown up in the room.
Right. Well, it's unfortunate that Marianne's candidacy isn't taken as seriously as it deserves to be, because here's the thing. I mean, Marianne has a vision for the country that deserves to be taken seriously. And so there's really two threads here. There's Marianne as a serious candidate, and then there's the vision that she brings. And so we want to talk about both of those things. When it comes to Marianne as a candidate, I always cringe when journalists say that Marianne is unserious, because I think it speaks to unseriousness on their part. Because a serious journalist would prepare for an interview, and all you have to do is watch about 5 seconds of Marianne in action before you realize that she is a very serious candidate and a very serious woman, a woman of substance. So ridicule is obviously a very powerful way to dismiss. And I think that's really the aim. I mean, you dismiss with ridicule, and that's what's going on here, right?
Yeah, you don't have to win the argument at that point. You don't have to prevail on substance. You can just use dismissal to kick someone to the curb. But, a lot of people who are very serious observers have not dismissed her. Bernie Sanders had a nice thing to say in response to her announcing her candidacy. I like what Jamel Bowie, who's a New York Times columnist, extremely intelligent guy, said the last cycle. I think after the second Democratic debate, he said, like, I'm surprised to hear myself saying this, but she out debated everyone on the stage. Like, that's quite a statement.
That's why she was the most Googled candidate, maybe the most Googled person.
Except for
one person in one state.
Montana. Montana, I think, got somebody more Googled. Anyway, and you really see it in her interviews. I mean, she is so well spoken. She displays such intelligence and thoughtfulness and care for the country that it's almost impossible not to take her seriously. And you can see interviewers go in thinking that she's a lightweight and finish the interview with their minds changed.
You can almost see it happen in real time. I think it might have been Stephen Colbert, the last presidential cycle, where she went on his show, and I got the sense that he didn't pay attention to her book, didn't really know the title of it, and by the end of it, he was like, "Well, damn," and she can do that. She has a real ability to communicate clearly and to communicate a vision clearly. And that's where I want to go next with this, because I mentioned that Marianne has a real vision that she brings to the campaign. And this is where I think the rubber really hits the road with her. She's campaigning on economic reform, specifically uncoupling economics from corporate influence. She's campaigning on a cabinet level department for children and youth. It's a crime that there's no one representing children and youth at the cabinet level right now.
What a great idea.
Totally. She's campaigning on a mass mobilization for climate change, and I don't think anyone can disagree that we need that. She's campaigning on a U.S. Department of Peace, and she's been so serious about that for decades. She founded or co-founded the the Peace Alliance, and the Peace Alliance has as their mission to advocate for this Department of Peace. So that goes on every year. I actually went to DC to lobby for a US Department of Peace,
Mm,
God, maybe even 10 years ago.
mm.
She's been advocating and campaigning on reparations, universal health care, free college tuition, and she's been talking about some of these things for decades. It's not just the US Department of Peace. She's been talking about reparations since the 90s. And so this may be a little bit of a side issue, but I don't understand why those things that I just mentioned, the things that she's campaigning on, are considered to be leftist or progressive values, because things like taking care of poverty and taking care of children feel like they should be human values. But regardless, this is her vision as a candidate that she is carrying and wants to bring into form.
Hmm.
And it's a humanitarian vision,
Yeah.
and I think that humanitarian vision should be more part of our political vision, and she brings that.
Yeah, and that leads me into something I want to spend some time with. I think it's very, very interesting. It's not well known. Um, but just to slide into it, she identifies strongly with FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, and his politics. And for those who don't think that the course has anything to do with politics, there is a really interesting passage. It's not in the FIP edition, it's in the CE. I think it made it all the way up through all the editing passes, I think to the very last one. So it's not in the FIP, but it is in the CE. And it's a passage that is almost without any doubt about FDR's four freedoms. So let me go ahead and read the passage and hopefully we can talk about it for a bit. Okay, it says, you have probably heard, and we added as editors probably to Helen and Bill, he originally said, you have heard many arguments on behalf of the freedoms, which would indeed have been freedom, if men had not chosen to fight for them. That is why they perceive the freedoms as many instead of one. We won't go into all this, but I want to read the passage. But the argument that underlies the defense of freedom is perfectly valid, because it is true it should not be fought for, but it should be sided with. Those who are against freedom believe that its outcome will hurt them, which cannot be true. But those who are for freedom, even if they are misguided in how they defend it, like by fighting for it, are siding with the one thing in this world which is true. Now, when I first read that, I think I'm younger than Helen and Bill were. I didn't know what the freedoms were. He obviously said Helen and Bill had heard of them. They'd heard many arguments on their behalf. He says, he's speaking approvingly. He says the freedoms would have been real freedom if men hadn't chosen to go to war for them. So he clearly likes the freedoms in and of themselves. They represent real freedom, except something went wrong when people decided to fight for them.
So Marianne identifies very strongly with FDR, but she also identifies strongly with Jefferson. And we can point out the obvious contradiction in Jefferson's claiming to stand for liberty and justice for all while living on a plantation run by slaves. But what she foundationally understands is that there is a promise, there's a promise in the founding of America. There's a promise of a true democracy and a country that is of, for, and by the people. And what she discusses a lot in her campaign cycle this time is that moral center around which we as citizens should convalesce, and the ideals about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. You know, we should hold as a nation and I would even broaden that to globally, like we should hold ideals about the kind of people that we want to be and the kind of values that we all collectively stand for. Here in America, we haven't lived up to those values. No one's arguing with that. But holding the values is something. And Jefferson did that. Again, conversations to be had about his life,
Yeah.
but he held the values. The founding fathers did hold the values. FDR holds the values, and Marianne speaks to the importance of holding these values as well. So even if we don't hit them, having them is important. And I think that's something that she brings as well. These freedoms are a value in themselves that we can rally around. So do you want to say more about what they are?
Yeah. So what are the freedoms? And this is a very specific thing that, again, I had to discover down the road after I first read that passage, because I didn't know. There was a 1941 speech that FDR gave. And in that speech, it was a super important speech. He envisioned a future world founded on 4 essential human freedoms. And they were freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want. So really freedom from poverty, and freedom from fear. And specifically, he meant fear of aggression from neighboring countries. It had to do with war. Now, they're often called the freedoms, just as the course calls them that. And they became, the seeds were laid in his speech, but it played out over the course of World War II, which started just like 11 months later. They became a major part of the country's understanding of why we went to war against the fascists overseas, to bring these freedoms into the world, to protect them in the world. And that, of course, going to war on their behalf matches exactly what the passage in the course says. FDR saw this new world based on these freedoms as attainable in his own time. And he went on to outline other priorities in that same speech, like equal opportunity, jobs for those who can work, ending the special privilege of the few. He was a very wealthy man himself, civil liberties for all, and a constantly rising standard of living. So his vision, which seems to have Jesus's essential approval, was a deeply humanitarian vision. It's about the benefit of everyone having freedom to and freedom from. The only thing is that Jesus in the course goes further than FDR in being truly anti-war. But, are we surprised that Jesus is a peacenik?
Mm-hmm. And that idea, all the things that you've just shared, that sounds so much like what Marianne is saying now.
Mm-hmm. Right. It really does.
So she's kind of the modern day carrier of that vision. And so I'm just wondering, like, why is it that we as course students don't treat her candidacy as more of a big deal? There's a level of apathy in the course community around what it is that she's doing. And so let's talk a little bit about why you think that is.
Yeah, I think, we've been kicking around the course community for a long time. I've been in the course community for more than 40 years. Just to see what people are specifically saying, I checked in at one of the really big online course discussion groups to see, what the comments are there. And they were very much along the lines of what I would have expected. I think what happens is the course affects students very often in a way where it pulls them away from sort of ordinary concerns about a better world, for instance, and into issues that are more metaphysical and more psychological. They're more interior. And so in that forum, there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm. A lot of people used principles to work themselves into a place of, yeah, I think it's fine if she wants to do that. But there wasn't a lot of go, Marianne. So I think it's just the age-old thing that you and I know about, which is course students have kind of gotten into this place where engagement with the world is somehow like a compromising of these principles that are really focused on our interior.
Right. And I want to talk about that here in just a second. But
Well, we did a podcast with
with
Marianne
Marianne
on
talking
that.
about that. Yeah, we had a conversation with Marianne about a year and a half ago about should we become involved in the world. And I want to get into that
Mhm.
because as we both know, that's a very important piece of this. But also, I think there's something else going on too. What's happening as just a sort of a casual observer is that she's in a really tough position. She's too political for the spiritual crowd, and she's too spiritual for the political crowd. And so she's really in a bit of a tough position, and I definitely feel for her on that level. Do you want to
Yeah,
say anything about that? Because
yeah,
okay, go ahead.
yeah. I mean, there's so much to say about that, but I think those are two different sides. Like she is too political for the spiritual crowd. I think people who assume that she's just trying to burnish her brand and sell more books don't realize that I don't think she's bringing her base with her on this journey. I mean, I don't have polling on that. We don't have stats on that. There's just a feeling that her audience is not coming with her. And to some degree, maybe she's alienating them by being so political. And so I'm not sure how much support she gets from all those people who bought her books. And then on the other side, like she's so readily made fun of from the political end because she's spiritual. And it seems we've talked about this, you and me, a bunch. It seems like it's open season on a female author on spirituality in a way that it wouldn't be open season on a businesswoman or a man coming
Meg
from a more
Whitman,
traditional faith. Exactly.
Meg Whitman from eBay, she was
Right.
taken seriously
Because
at the
she was a
political
business
level.
person.
People
And
are trying to pull Howard Schultz into the race. Maybe not this one, but they were in the
yeah,
past.
right.
Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, he considered a run. Andrew Yang. I mean, these are business people who were at least given a shot in the way that
They
Marianne
weren't
hasn't.
just ridiculed out of the space.
And also, I would just add to that, some of the criticism that is coming at Marianne is that she is in this just to sell books. And I mean, what I just said about her being caught in the middle is it feels really true. If she just wanted to sell books, I think she would have stayed in her spiritual lane.
Right.
She would sell a heck of a lot more books
Yeah.
staying there. But now she's kind of alienated the course audience, the spiritual audience, and not really kind of found the political audience yet. But
Yeah.
I do. So the whole idea that she's just doing this to sell books just feels kind of ridiculous to me. It's
It's a
just.
very cynical, convenient observation or criticism.
Mm-hmm. So I do want to get back to, though, the idea of why the course community isn't more excited about her candidacy. And part of it, as we say so often here, is this idea that as course students, our job is not to seek to change the world. Our job is to change our minds about the world. And that keeps a lot of course students and spiritual students in general from rolling up their sleeves and feeling like there's work to do here to heal and save the planet. So, do you want to say anything about that
Yeah.
teaching and how it may be influencing people's support for Marianne's candidacy?
I think we have a community, obviously one that was born in the mid 70s with the publication of A Course in Miracles. We have a community that, for historical reasons, because of certain influential teachers, because that community, I think, has been largely drawn from what Marianne would call the consciousness movement or the New Age movement. There's a set of cultural values in that community, and they aren't values that are pro go out and change the world. So in these conversations, you just did it, everyone, there has to be the obligatory quote of seek not to change the world from the course. But that mood in the community may not reflect the course itself very well. One thing that I like to point out is that the course says over and over again that we are here to save the world.
Right. I mean, I know I've said this in the past, but I honestly can't think of anything more anti-spiritual than sitting back and watching so much suffering just happen in the world and thinking that all you have to do is change your mind about the suffering and that's your job. I think the course is very clear. This is a course in miracles. Miracles are expressions of love. Our job is to go out there and be ambassadors of God's love in the world. And everyone will have their different ways of doing that, their different functions and forms of it. And one of those forms should be running for office, getting involved in politics. If ever, one thing that Marianne does say a lot, and I think she's right about this, is what spirituality touches improves. So when spirituality touched the business world in the form of mindfulness, it improved. The one area that spirituality hasn't touched is the realm of politics. And it has the potential, if we let it, to bring truly higher wisdom into a realm that desperately needs it. And so why are we not more excited about that? Why are we not embracing that idea more, that if spirituality is supposed to be the highest wisdom that this world has to offer, then why wouldn't we want to put it in politics where it could do real good?
Well, and I think what can help with all of that for course students is having an understanding of what the course is really advocating for. You're mentioning that miracles are expressions of love, and it's a course in miracles. If you look at the early examples where Jesus said something from the lives of Helen and Bill was a miracle, it was always some ordinary act of doing good. If you look at the life of Jesus, he didn't sit at home and drink wine and go fishing. He didn't seem to have a home. He was so busy going out there and doing good. So I think we need to have a bit of a case, and we made the case to some degree when we had that conversation with Marianne, a case that says the course really wants to unleash miracle workers into the world who, through most often just ordinary expressions of love, bring more light into the world and ultimately save the world. And saving the world is a huge positive in the course. It's never made fun of. It's never seen as, oh, just the ego wants to do that. It's always a positive whenever mentioned. So we have things like from the end of the text where it says, choose once again if you would take your place among the saviors of the world or would remain in hell and hold your brothers there. We have a place in the clarification of terms where it says that God's voice, quote, asks of everyone one question only. So you just have to wonder as a course student, what's the one question that God's voice asks of everyone only? And the question is, are you ready yet to help me save the world? So saving the world is a big deal in the course. And we are here to be miracle workers so we can contribute to that. If we understand that, then we can, I think, have a more wholehearted response to someone like Marianne, who's out there trying to do that.
You and I were talking about this idea recently about Jesus as a model of rolling up your sleeves and getting out there and doing real work to help heal. And you said something that I thought was really funny. You said Jesus wasn't just a carpenter with amazing inner peace. And I think we should keep that in mind, because if Jesus is our model, if Jesus is our teacher, and we're following a path called A Course in Miracles, and miracles are expressions of love, then we should really be doing our part to save the world. And I'll just, we had that shooting in Nashville a couple of days ago, and I'm a course student, but I got on social media and just said, it's the guns, it's the guns, it's the guns. Like, get the guns out. It's not about abortion. It's not about Black history. It's not about drag queens. It's about these guns. Get them off the streets. And inevitably, you're going to get comments like, well, um, your job is to change your mind about what's going on. Nothing outside of you is going to make you happy, that kind of thing. And I just feel like the course community and the world would benefit from flushing some of that out of the dialogue. And again, being able to hold two things as true at once, being able to hold two things as true at the same time. We understand that there's a deeper reality going on than what we see with our eyes, that in the truest sense, everything is okay on the level of spirit, but on the level of form, we're in trouble. Big trouble. And we need people to go out and help save the world. And part of the dialogue around this, and part of what I think stops people from stepping up and saying, yeah, I'm willing to do my part, is this idea that if you're trying to save the world, you must just want to be special. You must be doing this to get attention. And so Marianne has obviously received her fair share of that kind of criticism as well. And so what do we want to say about that?
Yeah, well, there's a really great line in the CE about that. And I want to go ahead and read that. It's about special agents. Okay, so it's got the word special in it. It says, when time is abolished and all the sons of God have come home, so there's no more time or space, no special agents will be necessary. You don't need them then. But then it says, but do not underestimate the power of special agents now, or the great need there is for them. I do not claim to be more than that myself. No one in his right mind ever wants either more or less than that, to be a special agent in the world's salvation. So that is extolling, that's saying, anybody in their right mind wants only that. And in fact, Jesus was exactly that. So we should have a really, full-throated affirmation of special agents in this world.
Well, if we had a course teacher who became president, then that would be the ultimate special agent in the world, wouldn't it?
Yeah. The ultimate special agent for the course.
Taking a long way to making that prediction come true.
Yeah. And I think it's worth pointing out that the author of the course, claimed to be Jesus, said that he saw the course as a special agent in the world. There's this guidance that you and I have talked about endlessly, it's all over the Circle's website, where after the course got published, Helen received a special message where he said the course, quote, will grow from infancy into a helper of the world. So he envisioned the course growing into a helper of the world, which sounds very large scale, right? It sounds like it's really making a difference. And like you say, if Marianne got elected, I mean, that would be such a leap towards whatever he envisioned being fulfilled.
I think that's what we're meant to do here as well, to grow from infancy into helpers of the world. So in our own micro ways, we're meant to do the same thing that the course is meant to do. But this idea, I mean, the way from a course perspective to become a helper of the world is to bring healing to the world. The course says that we all have the same function here, the function of healing, primarily through the form of forgiveness, but we each have our special function, the way that we're special agents in bringing about that healing in the world.
Yeah.
And so if you think about, okay, well, what heals? forgiveness heals. I think forgiveness is the ultimate form of love. And Marianne, you're just coming back to Marianne's campaign, she's really, as a spiritual teacher, we shouldn't dismiss the idea that if you're a spiritual teacher, you're not serious enough to be in the realm of politics. As we're saying, you can bring something new to politics. One thing that Marianne will say a lot, or what she has said in the past, is if you know how to change one heart, you know how to change the world. And as a result, those who understand spiritual principles and spiritual truths should be the last people to be sitting out these conversations, these political conversations. And so, it's really easy to look around and see that something has happened in our country, something's happened in our world. We have really taken a step backwards. We've taken a step towards becoming more divided. There's so much more hatred in the air now. Marianne talked in one of the debates about the dark psychic force that hate possesses, and we feel it. We feel something's wrong. But
we've headed more in that direction.
We're definitely headed in that direction. And so what can bring healing to that? Love. And so for those of us in the spiritual community, I think she's right. We know what changes hearts, and so therefore love. And so therefore we know what changes the world. I mean, I loved that part in, I think it was one of the debates, where Marianne just looked at the camera and said something like, "Mr. President, you have harnessed fear for political purposes, but I know there's a power greater than that. We are going to harness love for political purposes." And I'd personally love to see more of that language in her candidacy this time around. But that idea that love will always win is big.
But it's a real solution to the hate out there.
Right, because the hate, it feels like we're being swallowed by the hate. And so as spiritual students, we can sit back and we can say, well, it's not our job to get involved in diffusing that hate, or we can roll up our sleeves and do our part. And I just, whether Marianne wins or not, I absolutely commend her for stepping in the healing of the world in the big way that she has.
Yeah, and I wanted to play a clip from the current campaign cycle. It's really quite new, where she's asked. It's on a site called the Grio, and she's asked by the interviewer about that whole thing, about talking, using the harnessing of love to answer the fact that hate has been harnessed for political purposes. So if you'll bear with me here, I'm gonna like a 1-minute clip.
Do you find that when talking about things like love, and given your background as a author about spirituality, that it's almost a dirty word in politics?
Well, there is not just a Democratic, a political elite to whom the conversation sounds airy-fairy or silly, unless it's someone like a Cory Booker who mentions it, or, some male minister mentions it. Then they say, oh, yes, sir, that sounds great. So that's just an inconvenience for them that I bring up something more expansive than their political dialogue, which actually is sort of based in 1984. I can tell you this, when I'm talking to voters, they don't think it's ridiculous. The voters in this country realize, and the very people that you mentioned actually realize as well, we have a problem on our hands. Hatred in all its most virulent forms, white supremacy, racism, anti-Semitism, these ancient malevolent forces of mind have been harnessed in our time, as they have been harnessed before, for political purposes, and they are shouting. And at a time when hate is shouting, love cannot afford to whisper. We need to harness what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. We need to harness love of justice, love of democracy, love of one another.
Okay, I'll go ahead and stop it there. But there's so much that she said there that I like, because she does mention that if a male, believer from a more traditional faith was saying some of the things she was saying, she says, he'd get a pass. He'd probably get, approval. But I also love hearing her say we have to, turn to the better angels of our nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's speaking to something, calling out something that we all feel. And this is I read a post yesterday on Instagram that said, you realize we're in a cold civil war here in America, right? And yeah, it feels like that, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And so hatred has been harnessed for political purposes. And that's something that every authoritarian regime knows. You whip up the base through fear and use that to make people angry and distract them from what the left hand is doing. And we really do need to have a conversation about what love could bring to the healing of this hatred that we're seeing. And Marianne's the only one talking about it that I can see.
I think a lot of people get that hate has become a real problem, but then the solution becomes stop the haters, change the haters, constrain.
Hate the haters.
Hate the haters, right? Or the solution becomes, well, if you want to stop my hate, give it what it wants. Give it the changes out there in the world that it wants, and I'll stop hating. Who is saying, I'm sure somebody's out there saying it, but I only hear Marianne saying, love is the answer to that.
This whole conversation, this is a separate thing, but this idea of like, I'm going to hate you for being so intolerant. It's like,
right.
Oh my God, we've got hate on the right and the left. And so what do we do? And so we need someone, I know we're wrapping up here, but we do need someone to, we need lots of people to come in and infuse this political sphere with these principles and ideals of love.
And I just want to add on to her point about the better angels of our nature. I don't know if it would be politically wise for her to do this, but as course students, I think we would love to see her like pivot from better angel of our nature to talking about the divine light in everybody, the divine spark, whatever language, a larger audience, maybe not course language, but whatever language she could choose to talk about the sacred and divine dignity and worth in each person. Now, that might be political suicide for her, but it would be good to hear, right?
Well, I don't think it would be political suicide for her. She could use coarse language, inestimable worth. Every single person she doesn't have to say invisible divine reality. I'd love it if she said that, but she can say every human being has inestimable worth. And if we see that in each other, then we would be more willing to treat each other with the kindness and respect that we all deserve. And once we start treating each other more kindly, then we can get into healing some of the fabric of what ails us. And so, but in that clip you played, where the idea was like, is love to be ridiculed? And she says, well, the average American citizen is moved by these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that feels right. Like, if you're really paying attention, there's this conversation at the level of media that doesn't feel connected to what's going on in the rooms where she is. And what's going on in the rooms is when she's talking about harnessing the power of love, when she's talking about these spiritual ideas incorporated for political purposes, it is moving. And so, whereas she's being ridiculed at the like national level, when it comes to speaking one-on-one to American citizens, I think she can win them over, and she is. But
unfortunately, the narrative in the press will win the day. I saw some historical, there was some intellectual from from decades past, who basically, as one of his principles of how things work, is that the dominant narrative in the press will become public opinion. And so it's unfortunate, however much people respond to her in town halls, if that dominant narrative in the press is completely against her, I think that's going to be it.
Well, the dominant narrative is a reflection of individual values. Otherwise, we wouldn't allow it to be the dominant narrative. And so we have some real soul searching to do as citizens of this country and as citizens of the world about who it is that we want to be, what it is that we want to stand for. And I know Marianne is not in the race to elevate the conversation, but that is part of what she's doing. You know, I mean, we need to be having these discussions about who we want to be. I think she brings that. You know, what is our moral center, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She's bringing that. You don't.
Yeah.
When's the last time you heard someone talking about moral center as a presidential candidate? It's been a while.
Yeah.
So anyway, as we wrap up, I can tell you want to say something. So before we wrap up, go ahead.
I just want to say that, you know, whether or not her exact brand of politics is your brand of politics, as course students, it would just be nice for there to be an honoring of her candidacy that treats it as, you know, a big deal. She's one of our own. She's espousing values from the course that are influencing her campaign. The course is here to save the world or help save the world. The course wants us to take up our role of helping to save the world. And that's what she's trying to do. So even if we may not see eye to eye with her on all of her politics, and obviously course students are all over the map, we can still have an honoring of the fact that one of our own is up there doing the very, very hard thing, you know, of running for president. I like what Tony Ponticello said. He's the founder of the Community Miracle Center and head minister. And he said, I welcome Marianne in the race. I do not align with her politically, but I know she is thoughtful, intelligent, informed, and always looking for spiritual guidance. So there's somebody who's not agreeing with her politics, but recognizing that her candidacy deserves respect and honoring.
I never thought I'd say this, but I kind of miss the days of John McCain where, you know, somebody stood up in the crowd and made this false statement about President Obama. And rather than jumping into the false narrative, he said, no, ma'am, he's an American citizen. He's a good man. He's a family man. We just happen to disagree on our political ideology or however it was that he framed it. I'd love to get back to that idea that, you know, Marianne, as she said in her response to Biden's press secretary, she has a constitutional right to run for president. She is bringing something that is much needed, namely a ethic of love, a politics of love. And as course students, it would be nice if we could just, as you're saying, regardless of whether we agree or disagree with her politics, just say this is a big moment for A Course in Miracles in the world, and just mark it as such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, next week we will continue our conversation with how course teachings lend themselves to an elevated political vision for our world. And there's so much in the course that we could talk about on this idea, but we're going to talk about equality and acknowledging the invisible divine reality in one another, creating a society of nonviolence, forgiveness, and so on. And we hope that you'll join us for that discussion next week. See you then. Bye for now.